those not in the know, Grunge is a YouTube channel that posts click-baity videos on pop culture. In that, they're kind of like the Buzzfeed of geeky stuff, in that a lot of the things that they post are just wrong and can easily be disproven, but it feeds a narrative, so they post it anyway. And since I just did a video on comics, YouTube thought I ought to take a look at this one. So here's my take on Grunge's claim that Marvel doesn't want you to know things, but that Marvel really couldn't care less about.
The people behind Marvel Comics might create superheroes, but they themselves are just people. And normal people are as scummy as Norman Osborn, and as greedy as J. Jonah Jameson, and as devious as Obadiah Stane.
Sure, all people are scum. Oh wait, you only mean white people are scum, just like the villains you showed. Subtlety is not strong with Grunge.
This means that Marvel has done some things and published some questionable comic books that they'd rather you just forget altogether.
And that's why the vast majority of the Marvel comic line is printed and reprinted in trade paperbacks that you can walk into most bookstores and comic book shops in America and just buy off the shelves whenever you want, right?
Here's a look at some secrets Marvel doesn't want you to know.
I don't think Marvel cares. They're laughing all the way to the bank. But sure, let's see what you've got.
Strange practices. Marvel's iffy history of stereotypes and cultural appropriation has been dragged into the spotlight recently thanks to films like Doctor Strange and shows like Iron Fist, both of which take elements of Asian culture and whitewash them by casting Caucasian actors as the heroes.
Those characters have always been Caucasian. It's not like they took non-white characters and made them white to make a buck. Doctor Strange has always been white. Danny Rand has always been white. Get over yourselves!
But the directors at Marvel Studios and showrunners at Netflix aren't entirely to blame. It all started in the comics themselves.
Yes, the characters were white in the comics. Doctor Strange dates back to 1963, and Iron Fist dates back to 1974. And they were white guys. Welcome to the real world. Or do we have to retroactively alter history because it doesn't appeal to your SJW sensibilities?
Take the case of the Ancient One, Doctor Strange's mentor, who in the comics is portrayed as a stereotypical Asian mystic whose magical wisdom helps inform the white hero's journey.
Which was and is a very common trope. I mean, Mr. Miyagi from the Karate Kid movies is a perfect example. A wise Asian man passing his knowledge to a young, often white subordinate. And we see this again in the Arrow TV show with Yao Fei on the island, and Master Po in the Kung Fu TV show, or Pai Mei in the Kill Bill movies, or just about every Asian character in Big Trouble in Little China for that matter. But yeah, it's all Marvel's fault.
The filmmakers recognize this is a pretty dodgy concept.
No, they didn't. Their decision wasn't based on cultural appropriation nonsense, but on sound financial concerns.
But their solution was to double down by recasting the character as another white person.
Wrong again, sorry. Now, I know that Marvel hasn't come right out and admitted this, but it's been theorized that because China is such a huge financial chunk of modern movie success, that they wouldn't take well to a Tibetan character in a major movie. China and Tibet are not exactly on very good terms. Therefore, Marvel moved the Ancient One to a less potentially offensive country and cast the excellent Tilda Swinton in the role. Damn Marvel for wanting to make a buck, right?
A more radical idea might have been to cast Doctor Strange as an Asian American character.
Meaning, you want to, dare I say it, yellow wash the movie. But then again, these regressive assholes scream when you cast a white actor in a role that was traditionally non-white, but when you force non-white actors into traditionally white roles, well, that's just fine. Because it's all about race, but only as long as it's a race they like.
Which is what some scholars and industry veterans believe Doctor Strange co-creator Steve Ditko originally intended.
Which really doesn't matter, does it? All that matters is what actually happened. So we have more than 50 years of Doctor Strange as a white guy and one 5-page story in Strange Tales number 110 where some people think that Doctor Strange looked a little more Asian than he did later. I mean, never mind the fact that this is a single story in an anthology comic that nobody knew would ever come back, and that characters often change dramatically, especially in their early history. Nope, Steve Ditko must have intended him to be Asian. Sure, give me a break.
So why did Doctor Strange become white in the first place?
Because that's what his creators decided to make him. But for a more realistic answer, because the vast majority of comic book readers in 1963 were middle-class white males, that's why, like it or not, the majority of classic comic book characters were young, white, and male. It helped to sell comics. It's not like it's some kind of vast racist conspiracy.
The best guess is that the always pragmatic Stan Lee decided fans in the early 60s weren't ready for an Asian lead.
Which may have been true. Although by the early 70s, Asian and black characters were starting to emerge, including Shang-Chi, the master of Kung Fu, which honestly I think people are mistaking Danny Rand for when they think that Iron Fist was ever not white.
The more things change, the more they stay the same.
The more we show where these regressive idiots are wrong, the more they double down on their ignorance.
Slap leather. Imagine you know nothing about gay people, and yet you want to publish a comic book about a gay cowboy. What do? How about making him as overtly, flamboyantly, stereotypically, cartoonishly gay as possible? That's what Marvel did.
Why in the world would you want to publish a comic book about a gay cowboy? I mean, specifically, a cowboy who was gay, rather than a cowboy who just so happened to be gay, but it wasn't central to the story. Why would you do that?
Meet the Rawhide Kid, the star of an older Marvel comic about a gunslinger. Years later, the company decided to bring him back and make him as stereotypically and reductively gay as possible. While some actually felt the camp element intentionally inverts and counteracts heteronormative ideologies, try saying that 5 times fast, most readers just found it to be offensively bad and better off forgotten.
They make it sound like this is something Marvel did with the original series, which isn't the case. Now, Marvel published The Rawhide Kid from 1960 through 1979, although it went to primarily reprints in 1973 due to low popularity. In the original, while hero Johnny Bart was soft-spoken, he certainly wasn't depicted as gay. But when it came back as part of a 5-issue miniseries, as part of Marvel's Max, an adult-only line, it was really a joke. Series editor Axel Alonso said, "We thought it would be interesting to play with the genre. Enigmatic cowboy rides into a dusty little desert town, victimized by desperados, saves the day, wins everyone's heart, then rides off into the sunset, looking better than any cowboy has a right to. But sure, let's get upset over a joke, why don't you?"
The death of romance. Once upon a time, Marvel published a thriving line of romance comics, but the renewed popularity of superheroes in the 60s killed it off.
No, the lack of popularity among readers killed it off. Marvel also published lines of war comics, mystery and horror comics, and of course, the aforementioned Western comics. And you know something? All of them died for the same reason: low readership. Don't act like it was a deliberate act.
In the early years of the 21st century, though, Marvel decided to try to bring back the romance comic. So who did they hire to write it? Maybe an author who'd made a name for herself with Harlequin fiction, or possibly someone with experience writing modern romance comics.
I hate to say it, but writing for serial fiction is not the same as cranking out Harlequin romances, and by the time Marvel decided to revisit the genre, Kate Worley of Omaha fame was dying of lung cancer.
No, of course not. They hired Mark Millar, better known as the guy behind the comics that inspired the movies Kick-Ass and Wanted. His romance comic was called Trouble, so there was at least some truth in advertising. The two scantily clad lead characters spend most of their time hooking up until one of them accidentally gets pregnant. And you discover she's actually Aunt May, and her baby is Peter Parker.
Again, this was a planned limited series, and it had some serious issues, such as bad writing, casting Aunt May as the mother of Peter Parker, who gives the child to his sister Mary so she doesn't have to be punished by her fundamentalist parents. It was dumb and forgettable, but again, this isn't some grand scheme by Marvel to kill romance comics. They sold like crap, and probably would have done no better no matter who wrote them.
Marvel. Once upon a time, Marvel was run by a guy named Bill Jemas, who was actually in charge when things like Rawhide Kid and Trouble were published. He decided that those comics weren't embarrassing enough, though, so he went ahead and wrote his own comic called Marvel.
Yep, it sucked. And this was done as part of Marvel's You Decide event, where they would publish a couple of comics and let the readers decide which ones should survive and which one should go away. And Marvel was one that went away. The other one at the time, Ultimate Adventures, they didn't do any better, although it was certainly better than Marvel, which was voted one of the 15 worst comics of the decade.
Since its publication in 2002, Marvel has gained a reputation as one of the worst comics the company has ever published. It featured everything from randomly gratuitous covers that had nothing to do with the story, to a bizarre, nonsensical discussion on the nature of God, to a clumsy sequence about racism that immediately required a written apology. Jemas ended the series with a note proudly admitting that Marvel has been a story that would never have been published if I didn't happen to have this here job as president of Marvel. Well, at least he got that part right.
Well, that's because Marvel was a spoof of comic industry conventions and was aimed at insiders. The very first issue had a cover that spoofed the first episode of Smallville, complete with the main character tied up as a scarecrow with an M painted on his chest. Now, it was a bad comic to be sure, but this isn't a video about bad comics. I just think a lot of people, including Grunge, don't recognize what it was supposed to be about.
Toys make the money.
Because that's somehow a surprise, right?
Spider-Man is the most profitable superhero in the world, but not from his comics or movies. In 1 year alone, Spider-Man merchandising made Marvel about $1.3 billion.
Guess what? So did Star Wars. In fact, it wasn't the money that George Lucas made off of the movies that made him rich. It was the merchandising rights that he kept. You say it like it's a bad thing, or that it's at all new. Marvel doesn't want you to forget that. They're proud of it, and they should be.
Spidey toys, blankets, shoes, glasses, bug repellent. That's where the real money comes from.
Just like every single popular media franchise out there. If you can slap a logo on something, you can bet that the more popular it is, the more it will sell.
That's also why all the various movie franchises are so important to Marvel. Because while films certainly make money, that's not as important as how they increase brand recognition and enable Marvel to sell more licenses of more characters to more brand partners. For instance, 3 years ago, would you have bought a plate with Rocket Raccoon and Groot? No, because you didn't know who they were.
Lots of people did. Rocket Raccoon has been around since 1976, and Groot has been in the comics since 1960. They just weren't all that popular, and people weren't selling merchandise with their images. Had they been? I'm sure fans would have bought them then too.
Now, you'll buy anything with them on it. That's how Marvel actually makes money. Just like how the movie theaters themselves really earn their cash by selling you overpriced popcorn rather than actual movie tickets. Who knew, right?
That's because theaters make virtually no money from the sale of those tickets. The overwhelming majority goes to the studios, at least in first run. The only way most theaters stay in business is selling food and drinks. But you knew that, right?
Civil disobedience. Ta-Nehisi Coates is an amazing writer.
That's debatable. A lot of people think he's actually pretty bad, a black-centric writer who consistently allows his black rage to get in the way of a good story.
Perhaps best known for his work Between the World and Me, about life as a black man in America, which won the National Book Award for Nonfiction. He later won the Genius Grant from the MacArthur Foundation.
Big deal. The more liberal you are, the more likely you are to win some of these awards.
All of these qualifications help explain why Marvel sought him out to write titles like Black Panther.
They did it because they were sucking up to the very vocal SJWs, something that's pushed Marvel out of the top sales spot.
And why it's so bizarre that Marvel completely ignored his advice not to kill a major black character for no good reason.
Seriously, do you not read comics? Marvel, and it's not just Marvel, kills characters all the time, almost always for no good reason. They do it to get a sales spike because comics where characters die sell more. And it isn't like these characters stay dead. They always come back after a little cooling off. Death means nothing in the comics.
The character in question was James Rhodey Rhodes, better known as War Machine, who you might also know from the movies. During Marvel's 2016 event, Civil War II, the publisher decided that in order to provide some character development for a couple of other white characters, specifically Captain Marvel and Iron Man, they would kill off Rhodey.
Like it or not, Rhodey is a side character. Now, I love me some War Machine, but side characters die all the time to spur the main characters to fight on. Isn't that the whole reason Nick Fury spun Coulson's death to push the Avengers to fight?
Having been around for decades, War Machine is one of the most recognizable black characters in the world of superheroes.
You'll notice that this is all race-based, right? I mean, when white characters die, which happens all the time, people like Coates don't blink an eye. I mean, Tony Stark has died several times. In fact, he died in the 90s, allowing Rhodey to take over Stark Enterprises. So a black man benefited from the apparent death of a white man, but did anyone complain? Nope.
And his huge role in the movies proves that he's more than just a fan favorite. He's a massively popular and visible character in his own right.
Which is why he got to die, because it would have an emotional impact. He didn't die because he was black, he died because it would help the story. But these regressive idiots only see things in terms of race and gender. They don't comprehend actual storytelling.
Naturally, Coates urged them not to go through with it, writing a long missive to the Marvel bosses.
Because he can only think in terms of race. That's why he only writes comics about black characters. Because he's a racist.
Marvel ignored his advice and killed off Rhodey, resulting in more than a little backlash from fans and critics.
Only from the regressive whining left, who again don't care about the story reasons that characters die, only about their skin color.
And this isn't the first time this has happened either. Like Goliath in the first Civil War series, Rhodey became yet another victim of superheroing while black.
Funny, nobody says that about white superheroes that die. I mean, superheroes like Superman, Supergirl, Wolverine, Green Arrow, Green Lantern, the original Captain Marvel, Professor X multiple times, Spider-Man, Phoenix, Captain America, Robin, again multiple times, Batman, The Flash, and a massive list of others. But I don't see these regressive assholes coming out of the woodwork to whine about white heroes dying. They only do that about the non-white ones.
Contract killers. Back when Marvel started out, the late great Jack Kirby co-created some of Marvel's biggest characters, including the Avengers, X-Men, Fantastic Four, and the Incredible Hulk, just to name only a handful.
Yes, Jack Kirby was a very prolific creator. In fact, combined with people like Stan Lee, John Romita, Steve Ditko, John Byrne, Neil Adams, Chris Claremont, I mean, the list goes on and on. These people made Marvel what it is. We owe him a great deal of gratitude for his efforts.
But there was a tiny problem. Marvel didn't care. Since he was considered work for hire, Kirby got paid by the page, and Marvel kept all the rights and all the profits.
There's a tiny problem. You don't understand historical context. Yes, people in the early days got screwed, not just at Marvel, but at DC too. And that's just how the industry ran. Artists and writers didn't get the kind of credit and compensation that they do today, and that's too bad. But you can't retroactively change history, which a lot of people on the political left are trying to do.
Naturally, once Marvel started making literally billions of dollars off his creations, this became a sore spot for Kirby's family, who sued.
Which is certainly their right to do. That doesn't change the fact that Kirby's contract with Marvel at the time didn't give him the credit or compensation for things that happened in the future. And that has largely changed in the comics industry, and it did decades ago.
With a looming PR disaster on their hands, Marvel eventually cut a deal with his estate. Not everyone is so lucky, though. Ghost Rider co-creator Gary Friedrich also sued Marvel over profits from their films. But without the name recognition of the Kirby estate, Marvel felt no need to play nice. The case settled in 2013, but Marvel sure made life tough on the guy. Stay classy, Marvel.
How much money did Ghost Rider make compared to the Avengers? The first movie grossed about $228 million worldwide. Avengers made $1.5 billion. Avengers made almost as much in the first weekend as Ghost Rider did in its entire run. It all comes down to business and contracts. Figuring you can just renegotiate your contracts after the fact because you're not happy, that's a pretty leftist thing to do.
Don't be like Ike. Marvel has a secret CEO named Ike Perlmutter.
He's not a secret. He's just not all that public. He's also not very powerful at Marvel these days. He's got virtually no control over the Marvel Cinematic Universe, although he's still got some say over the comics and the television properties. He is reclusive, but he's got every right to be if he wishes. You guys just don't like him because he's a conservative and he supported Trump.
Just how reclusive is this guy? Until recently, the last known photo of him dated to the 1980s, with one website going so far as to have his friends describe him so they could draw an approximation of what he might theoretically look like. He's basically like a supervillain hiding inside a volcano lair.
Here's the plan. We get the warhead and we hold the world ransom for $1 million.
What we do know about Perlmutter is that he apparently doesn't like female superheroes very much.
No, he knows what sells in the real world, which if you look at the actual record of success for male superhero movies and female superhero movies, he's absolutely right about it.
A while back, the infamous Sony hack revealed a bunch of secret emails between Sony and Marvel, and among them was an email called Female Movies from Perlmutter, where he cites films like Supergirl and Catwoman as proof that movies starring female superheroes are a terrible idea.
And given that the 3 movies he listed, all of which are viewed as horrible movies that lost money, how can you argue? Just because you want them to be successful doesn't mean they actually have been.
That probably explains why Marvel has been so reluctant to make any movie starring lady leads, and why Captain Marvel was pretty much announced the instant Disney kicked Perlmutter out of the Marvel studios.
And we'll have to see how that does. At the moment, female superhero movies haven't done all that well at the box office. Now, I'm hoping Wonder Woman is good, but considering how terrible DC superhero movies have been of late, I'm not holding my breath.
You know what they say, the arc of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is long, but it bends towards justice.
Nobody says that. Nobody. You're an idiot. What really bugs me about these videos is that the facts are very easy to find, but it gets in the way of the story they want to tell and the audience they want to cater to. So they just lie about it because they don't care. They never come back and admit that they were wrong because the truth doesn't matter. It's the spin that counts, and their audience is too stupid to know any better. And that describes the regressive left quite well, unfortunately. Stupid and gullible and disinterested in the truth. And there are far too many media outlets who cater to these ignorant snowflakes and tell them what they want to hear rather than what actually is. Are we really surprised at how screwed up these people are? I know I'm not.
Everything changes.